is really interesting, Nance, and you use all of the textures in your paintings, and I really like the way that they really pop off the canvas. It's really interesting. So you incorporate those textures with really interesting use of color. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you plan your colors and what goes into creating the paintings that you do?
Well, there are many, many plans for color usage in painting. People refer to it as their color palette. And there are almost as many color palettes as there are artists, I think. But many people use a fixed palette. In other words, they use the same colors every time. Some schools of thought use very few numbers of paints. Some use a great many numbers of paints. And you know, there's just about every other kind of plan in between. But for myself, I use a system that I consider an unfixed double primary. And by that I mean unfixed, I allow myself to use different colors in different paintings, or usually in different series of paintings. And then double primary means I have 2 reds, 2 yellows, 2 blues. And so I wanted to give you a little example. I've got some cards I'm going to show you. Now here I have, so when I'm going through planning a painting, I'm going to make up samples and decide my colors based on the mood I want and what I'm painting. And here's a manganese blue and an ultramarine, and so that might be one set. And I'm looking for a warm and a cool combination that will give me a wide range and depict what I'm looking for. Now here's a cobalt and an ultramarine, and here's a cerulean blue deep and a dioxazine purple. And you'll notice I said purple, I didn't say blue. I don't limit myself to tubes that are called blue. So in this way I can include a secondary, but I think of it as a primary. I utilize it as a primary in the painting. So you would mix with those, but those would be the only 2 blues that you would use for the entire painting. Okay, that makes sense. And I'd like to say that I'm very rigorous about this system, but no, if I decide a painting absolutely must have 3 blues, well, then it gets 3 blues. There you go. Good. But and you know, and then we do the same thing for the reds. Here's a quinacridone violet and a cadmium red medium. And then here's a cad red medium and a Paranone orange. You see, that's a lovely, if you want a fiery painting, that'd be a good combination. So sunsets or sunrise. And then here's a Paranone orange and a burnt sienna, very earthy. Right? And then if we look at the yellows, here's a Hansa yellow light and a yellow ochre, very traditional is the way I think of it. Here's a nickel azo and a cad yellow medium. And then here's something, here's an ochre and an iridescent gold. Oh, I like that combination. And so you can do, you know, you can add in something spicy, and by having a system but an unfixed color palette, I can allow myself to change from series to series, experiment with new colors, because I'm an inveterate experimenter. I love to experiment with textures and colors all the time. But when I get down to doing my painting, what I'm going to do is I would pick a set, right? So then I'd have this set. But maybe I want to study something a little more, right? So here I was doing waves, and I said I need to look at waves, and I was using burnt sienna to neutralize the colors, so to go from the blue to the neutral. And here I just took all the blues I had available to me, and some of them are the same color but by different makers, you know, because and some of them are hues rather than the original pigment. So it's a nice way to study it, and here I draw it out with white and then the sienna. And here I did a slightly more complicated study where I'm looking at the reds versus the yellows and drawing them out with a little bit of white. And what it does is it really allows you to study and look at the color differences and help you determine what you're going to do next. Right. So you would do this for a series of paintings that you were working on? Typically a series. So that they would
work together, and that's it. And then you can use those again later for different paintings as well.
And of course, over time, I don't change completely from series to series. I have, usually I end up with base colors that will run for many series.
So you have some favorites that you pick.
I have favorites.
Do you have favorite combinations as well that you tend to go towards, maybe in the...
I do a little bit. I tend to use an alizarin or a primary magenta. I tend to use a Hansa yellow light a lot. And I tend to use ultramarine quite a bit in combination with others. So, you know, if I had a favorite set, that would be my baseline, and then I would be looking to experiment with, you know, the second of those colors.
So, and mixing them together a little bit to see how they would work
and
in the waves.
I might play with the color. I might do a whole painting as a study to play with if I've changed the color set that I'm using. It's a little extra work, but because I love to play with color, it's part of the joy of art for me.
Right.